Self-consciousness in scapegoat survivors of narcissistic abuse. Do you worry that something about you makes you stand out in a bad way? Do you find it hard to live without thinking there is some sort of problem with you? And do you worry that the more someone gets to know you, the less they will like you? Well, it's no accident that scapegoat children of narcissistic parents often feel self-conscious. These children have to embody the worthlessness that their parent cannot tolerate in themselves. So having to perceive oneself as objectionable can make a person very conscious of who they are. They have to worry that others will see how defective they supposedly know themselves to be. It becomes extremely hard to forget oneself and assume acceptance from others. When a parent calls attention to the child's habits, posture, speech, gait, manners, weight, temperament, elocution, and/or intelligence, the child can feel like an object to the parent. Being an object to the person you depend on is an awful experience. You have no say in how they see you based on your own definition of yourself. Instead, you have to become conscious of and operate within their definition of you. For the scapegoat child, the parent's definition of them is biased by the parent's need to see the child as less than. So the child is trapped in the parent's gaze of them, and that gaze is rigged to make the child feel different, even disgusting, and devalued. Well, in today's video, I address how a narcissistic parent's scrutiny can make a scapegoat child feel very self-conscious. The parent may scrutinize aspects of the child that are real, but distort them into qualities to feel ashamed of. For example, a scapegoat child may show marked intelligence and a love for learning at a young age. A narcissistic parent who is insecure about their own intelligence may tease the child for being such an egghead. Now the child's good quality feels like a reason for embarrassment. This child becomes conscious of a self that is preoccupying, shameful, and alien. The way out for scapegoat survivors is a new relationship where they feel understood and accepted from the inside out. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in recovery from narcissistic abuse. In my professional and personal experience, I've worked to identify the fundamentals to the process of recovery. This has led me to what I call the 3 pillars of recovery. Pillar number 1 is making sense of what happened so that you know it wasn't your fault. Pillar number 2 is moving away from narcissistic abusers and towards safe people. And pillar number 3 is living in defiance of the narcissist rules. It's also, I think, essential to find and participate in communities of people who can get, validate, and support you on this path. I've both seen and experienced large improvements in quality of life after applying these pillars. And I'd also like to mention that I'm offering a new free ebook called 4 Ways to Heal for Adult Scapegoat Survivors. And in it, I offer 4 strategies to reclaim your authentic self from the fake and painful scapegoat identity, learn and apply the science behind gaining distance from narcissistic abusers, know the secret to reducing social anxiety for scapegoat survivors, and a way to accept yourself as the fallible and valuable person you are. You can find the link to the free ebook in the description box below. Why a narcissistic parent makes a scapegoat child feel self-conscious. One might wonder why a parent would go out of their way to make their child feel bad about themselves. The answer starts with the parent's pathological narcissism. This means that the afflicted person has an exaggerated yet fragile self-worth. They also use others to prop this self-worth up, either through association or disassociation. They may feel more self-worth when they associate with people they see as higher status. They can also feel more self-worth when they disassociate from people they see as lower status. The problem for the narcissistic parent is that no child is actually lower status to that parent. This fact is a problem for the narcissistic parent seeking to prop themselves up by disassociating from this child. The parent solves it by making up reasons to see their scapegoat child as lower status. And these reasons become prophecies the child has to live out. One of the ways a parent can convince their child of their lower status is by scrutinizing them. Instead of seeing the child's existence as fundamentally understandable and normal, the parent calls it into question. They pay attention to the child under the auspices of noticing what is strange about the child. I ought to mention, I know I've said this in past videos, but I put air quotes in these videos a lot. And I think well, I know that's because so many of the sentences I describe of what happens between the narcissistic parent and the child is like this sort of, I'll call it a false reality, where, the parent's accusing the child of being defective or in one way or another. And so when I say, state things like, and so the child is defective, I kind of want to put air quotes around, the word defective, because it's a product of this faux or false reality. It's not sort of to be taken, or these words aren't to be taken at face value in a sense. And so scapegoat children are often familiar with the dread of hearing their name in their narcissistic parent's mouth. This often involved the parent talking about their child in subtly humiliating ways. Well, let's look at another anonymized case example to illustrate. Devin was big for his age as a first grader. He liked to roughhouse with his friends and was infatuated with being strong. He would watch the movie Hercules over and over because he was delighted by the feats of strength in it. One day, he went shopping for clothes with his pathologically narcissistic mother. She looked at him and said, "Devin, you're husky. We need to find clothes that will fit a husky boy." Devin wasn't sure what this meant. He said, "Mom, what does husky mean?" She said, "It means you have bigger bones than other kids your age." He went to try on clothes and she frowned and said, "Your waist is too big for these pants, Devin. I'll go get a bigger size." He was confused. He felt like she saw something wrong with him, but couldn't say exactly what. The next week, they were visiting his maternal grandparents, and his mother said at the dinner table, "Devin is very big for his age. I took him clothes shopping last week, and we had to go to the husky section." Devin felt embarrassed, but he still wasn't sure exactly why. He wondered why his mother was making such a big deal out of him being big for boys his age. He overheard her on the phone telling other parents about his husky clothes also. He remembered feeling singled out and put down. At the dinner table in his own family, she would point out that Devin did not chew his food enough and ate too fast, again, supposedly. She said that was why he was too big. Devin felt terrible. Now he knew that there must be something wrong with his body. At around this time, Devin stopped seeing himself as a strong boy for his age and started seeing himself as disgustingly overweight. He saw this when he looked in the mirror and feared that his classmates thought the same thing of him. He grew extremely conscious of his body and couldn't shake the feeling that it was a liability instead of an asset. Well, what Devin did not know was that his mother, at the same time, was worried about her own weight. She had been quite thin up until that point and seemed to feel threatened by having put on some weight. She transferred this fear of her own perceived defect onto her son by calling so much attention to his body. Although she did not directly state he was overweight, her harping on the subject was enough to make Devin self-conscious about it. Seeing him self-conscious about his body helped her disassociate from her own fears of becoming physically unappealing. What it's like for the scapegoat child. Well, the scapegoat child is in the vulnerable position of needing to be who their parent recognizes. If the parent sees them as strange, then the child had better believe they are strange. For the child to believe otherwise would risk diverging from the parent's reality. It's better to be a defective somebody to someone than a nobody to no one. The scapegoat child gets coerced into being the one who has something wrong with them. Just like Devin's mother kept bringing up his husky body, so the narcissistic parent keeps insisting on the child's defectiveness. The child cannot help but assume the parent is right to focus on their, again, supposed defect. Lastly, the narcissistic parent often finds some small basis in reality upon which to transfer their defective feelings. So in Devin's case, it was that he was in fact big for his age. His mother used this fact to relocate her own weight insecurities onto him. Devin found her insinuations about him more believable because there was something about him that served as the hook for these accusations to hang on. Thus, the scapegoat child is forced into being self-conscious about one or more aspects of themselves. There are three features to this self-consciousness in the child's and later the survivor's experience. Feature number one, preoccupation. It takes a lot of work for the scapegoat child to stay self-conscious. And this is because their natural being doesn't correspond to what they have to be self-conscious about. The child is not, in fact, what they are self-conscious about. But to be self-conscious, they must harass themselves with supposed reminders of their defectiveness. The scapegoat child is in a predicament. They want relief from the agony of self-consciousness, yet it is impossible to stop. To not be self-conscious in these ways would be to have no relationship to their parent. It's always better to be anxiously preoccupied about supposed defects in themselves and known to their parent than to go unknown. Feature number two, shameful. Well, the scapegoat child's attention gets called to their supposed defect because of the alarm bell of shame. They've been supposedly shown how they really are by their narcissistic parent. This information was received in a way where the child was seen as a defective object. And for this to happen, there has to be a break in the subject to subject or human to human connection that we all ideally want. To hope to be seen from the inside and instead be seen as a defective object is inherently shaming for the scapegoat child and for all of us. Such experience can overwhelm the child's abilities to cope in the moment. And after a trauma like this, it can be natural to rehearse it. The child can feel like they need to stay aware of it to make sure it does not happen again. Or if it does, that they can survive it this time. This can mean keeping the experience of shame in one's consciousness so that they are not ambushed by it again. You can substitute shame for self-consciousness too in this respect. Feature number three, alien. No matter how much the scapegoat child has to torture themselves via self-consciousness, there's a nagging sense that none of it is true, that it is really alien to who they actually are. This feature can be hard for the child to articulate at the time. Experientially, there can be a sense that the way their parent is treating them doesn't feel real, but the way they feel real in themselves is not recognized by their narcissistic parent as being real. So the child has to prioritize the parent's claim of what is real about them over their own. This means having to cling to an identity that feels ill-fitting or alien, yet necessary. The alternative, again, would be to insist on how they feel themselves to be with having no one there to echo that back to them. Well, let's go back to Devin to illustrate these three features. He now had to contend with the premise that he was objectionably overweight to himself and to others. It flooded his thoughts. He always felt on the verge of embarrassment for this. Shame was a constant and unwelcome companion in his world now. He'd find himself constantly reminded to worry about this. It was confusing and unavoidable for him. Devin actually felt lost if he wasn't thinking of what to do about this supposed defect. He also felt an underlying bewilderment when he was thinking about this defect. It was as if he had a secret language that skewered him, which he could only speak with his mother. She spoke this language to him, and he understood it by thinking of himself in the way she led him to. Outside of this pathological arrangement, this identity wouldn't hold. Devin had no other viable relationship with a caring adult to figure this out with. He was on his own in this respect. The only thing he could do was go along with his mother's ideas about who he was. This meant staying occupied about the shameful supposed fact that he was overweight and ignoring how alien this all felt to him. Devin functioned in his life from this point forward on top of this bed of feeling defective. No matter what he did or accomplished, it was marred by this underlying supposed reality. It became a wobbly fact of life that he had to keep with him at all times. How to escape the binds of self-consciousness? Well, liberating oneself from this type of self-consciousness is a process, and there can be two challenges in doing this. First, being self-conscious to stay close to someone important may become what attachment feels like. And if that is the case, then a different way of feeling attached is needed before the old way can be given up. Second, the pull to feel self-conscious may get reinforced by finding friends and partners who also require it. The scapegoat survivor may not feel close unless someone is shining a light on their supposed defect. Therapy can help scapegoat survivors overcome these two challenges. First, a therapist has extremely low odds of needing their client to feel self-conscious so that they don't have to. So you can be sure that you will not be with someone who reinforces your requirement to be self-conscious. Second, a therapist's job is to facilitate understanding of how you have had to define closeness and whether that makes you happy or not today. This can empower the scapegoat survivor to identify the forces that go into them to feel self-conscious. This can empower the scapegoat survivor to identify the forces that go into them feeling self-conscious. And as they participate in the therapy and are free from those forces, they get to make different choices. In order for this to happen, though, a sense of attachment between client and therapist often needs to develop, because this alternative form of attachment may need to be experienced for the survivor to give up the only form of attachment that they have known to date. Let's go back to Devin one more time to illustrate these points. He sought therapy in his mid-20s because he felt imprisoned by his anxious self-consciousness. He explained to his therapist that he had found his appearance to be objectionable since he was young. Nothing they discussed seemed to change this in the first couple years of treatment. However, Devin consistently attended his sessions, and he began to look forward to them as a place to relax and entertain whatever thoughts he had in the moment with his therapist. He had not been afforded such a relationship growing up. People in his family were not able to communicate from a baseline sense of caring about one another. Interactions just didn't feel safe then. Devin, though, in the therapy was beginning to experience what safety in a relationship felt like. Over time, Devin was able to make more use of his therapist's interpretation that his current self-consciousness was a way to stay close to his internalized narcissistic mother. He didn't win an internal argument to prove that his appearance was acceptable. It was more like he turned away from the premise entirely. And that became apparent in one particular session a couple years into treatment. Devin said, I think I'm actually a healthy guy, psychologically and physically. It's kind of scary to say that actually, but I do think it's true. His therapist nodded and listened intently. I just had this image come to mind. It's like I was kidnapped onto a boat where the captain and the crew told me that there was something wrong with me. I walked around the ship and did my sailing chores every day thinking they were right. But now I feel like I've leaped off of that old boat onto a boat that you're steering. On this boat, I know that I'm healthy. I also know that you know I'm healthy. It feels totally different, but I'm still on a boat and I'm still going where it is I need to go. Well, this session demonstrated how Devin was able to give up the old way of thinking about himself in favor of what had developed between he and his therapist. This notion of understanding himself as healthy while remaining close to someone else, in this case, his therapist. Well, I hope you found today's video helpful, particularly if you found these forms of self-consciousness to be a feature of your own experience, and you identify as a scapegoat survivor from a narcissistic family in your upbringing. And with that, I want to thank you all again for your continued support and engagement with this channel. You know, the thoughts and insights that come out into the comments section of not just the weekly videos, but videos past are, again, just great. And I think actually I feel amazed and privileged to read each week. Well, so with that, again, from Brizo back there and myself, I look forward to posting again next week on Friday. Take care.